this really interesting guy, the Mysterious Mr Sycowski. You know, I'll tell you, son, if you're gonna lie, lie big. Let me tell you something. When I was a boy, there was a kid I went through school with for 8 years named Johnny. I'm gonna call him Johnny O'Rourke because he's still alive. Johnny O'Rourke. His parents are from Ireland, so I went to school with him for a long time. And he was really, really skinny kid. I'm what they call sallow. I've got really pale skin. He compared to him, I look like a black guy. I mean, he was just incredibly white, pale guy. So he made lying like I don't know how to say an art form. Really, truly, he in this out in the schoolyard, where things could get rough. Nobody bothered him because everyone kind of respected him, even though he weighed like 10 pounds. People just thought, wow, this guy's really is too smart to be here with us. Let me tell you what happened. Oh, first let me explain. In those days, there was a show called the Beverly Hillbillies, and in the opening of the song of the show, this guy Jed, he has a gun. He's a hillbilly. He fires a gun, and it hits the dirt, and oil shoots up, and he's a millionaire. So, with that in mind, the nun says to Johnny, "Where's your homework?" And he says, "Sister." He stood up, right, like a lawyer. He had one hand on the desk, the other hand on his hip, and he says, "Sister." And he's pointing a finger at the nun. I can't believe he's doing it. And he said, "Sister, last night I had finished my homework. My parents said, sister, it was the finest homework they had ever seen." So the nun said, "Oh, really?" She said, "Where's your homework?" He said, "Well, while I was showing them my homework, sister, I heard a rumbling. I immediately went out to the yard." Now, bear in mind, excuse me, we're in frozen Connecticut in a valley. There's a river that goes through the middle, and it's basically two piles of rock. There, trust me, people, there was no oil there. He said, "I ran outside, sister, because I heard a rumbling. I immediately picked up the rock because I heard that's where the rumbling was coming from. And sister, oil shot out from the ground." And the nun said, "Really, Johnny? What kind of oil was it there, John?" He said, "Sister, it was Esso oil." So the nun said, "Well, that's wow. But John, where's your homework?" He said, "Sister," he hung his head down. I mean, I just, he almost brought a tear to your eye. He was so good at this. He said, "Sister, the oil ruined my homework." But then he said, "I'm willing to bring it to the convent on Sunday," when, of course, the nuns are all locked up. You couldn't go there on Sunday, "and give it to you." And the nun was forced to say, "No, just forget about it at this point." What happened to John? Well, years and years later, he became the first selectman of this little town next to my town. And someone did an audit, as they do, and they said, "We're missing 50,000 bucks." This is about 20 years ago, and for a little town, that's a lot of money. And John was outraged. He said, "My God, I'm outraged. I'm going to investigate this myself." Of course, he's the guy everyone thinks did it, so he's going to investigate himself to find out where the money went. And he did, and he came back a while later. He said he had the money, he had the books about the money in a safe. Why you would put the town books, public books, in a safe, only he would know. And somehow these extremely intelligent, apparently, mice broke into the safe, I guess, and they ate the book with the number. They ate it. And so he unfortunately could not explain, show you where the money was. But anyway, he fled to Florida. He got away with it. In the end, he got away with it. If you're going to lie, lie big. So let me tell you about this guy, Mr. Sycowski. In 1934, this very dapper fella named Abraham, sometimes he called himself Alex, Sycowski shows up at the Polish border. He claims he's a returning Pole from the United States. And the Poles said, "Well, that's fine, but you can't come in. You have no passport. You don't even have identification." So they held him, and they learned that he had, in fact, lived in Montreal under the name Alexander Navarro Fernandez. Sometimes it's Carlos Lados. And he was from Spain, he said. Occasionally, he insisted that the staff of the Mount Royal Hotel where he was staying in Montreal referred to him as Count Navarro, because he told them, of course, he was a cousin to the late King Alfonso of Spain. Why not? He also made it a habit of showing people these cigar boxes. Nobody knew if they were all filled, but he said they were cigar boxes that he said were filled with $1,000 bills. No one ever saw the bills, but that's what he said. Many people suspect at this point that he's a fibber, but one dummy goes to this count and he says, "Can you lend? Since you got all this money in cigar boxes, can you lend me some money?" How that ended up was the guy ended up paying the fake count $1,500, lending him $1,500, if you can believe this. So a lot of people though believed him because he said that he had 10 million stashed away in safe boxes all over the United States. That he had fronted money when he was a gangster for Al Capone and Legs Diamond. Well, of course, Diamond's dead by that point. I think Capone is probably on his way to jail, but he's got a solemn duty to protect this money. And unfortunately, if he were to go back in, he'd have to go from state to state to state to all these different banks to get the money. Gangsters would follow him and kill him and take the money. So people actually bought into this, and they said, "My God, well, let me lend you some money and tide you over until you can get in there." And he said, "Well, great." And they gave him a lot of money, and he vanished, and he ended up in Venezuela. And the Venezuelans tossed him out of the country once again. He has no identity. He goes to the Dutch West Indies, and they said, "No, get out. He has no identity. He has no passport." In 1940, he returns to Canada. Now, Canada was part of the British Commonwealth. I think they were a nation by then, but they were part of the Commonwealth, and they had declared war on Nazi Germany, like the British, and so they're at war, and they promptly arrest this guy, Sycowski, as a Nazi spy. Apparently they roughed him up pretty good from what I read, and they literally ripped apart his luggage and all of his clothes, looking for any kind of evidence of any crime they could fit to anything. They couldn't, nor could they prove he was a spy, but there were internment camps, like not POW camps, but close, one step down, all over Canada, but they were way the hell in the woods, and they put him in an internment camp, middle of nowhere, but of course, he disappeared from there. No surprise there. He ends up flying to Miami 3 years later, and he's arrested by the FBI. I don't know where he was for those 3 years, but he's arrested by the FBI on a warrant. There's this Washington, D.C. lawyer who apparently was not a very bright man named M.O. Dunning, had advanced the supposed count, Sycowski, $125,000 to get into the U.S. so he could go find the mobster money all over the banks. And this guy Dunning, I don't know whether he was mentally challenged, but he went out and he borrowed collateral from Sigmund Jonas, who was the president of Colonial Airlines, which flew back and forth to Montreal, in return to getting this $125,000. Remember now, that's a lot of cash in 1940. I've forgotten the year, but 40-something. It's a lot of money. That Dunning thinks he's going to get 10% of the gangster money hidden in various bank accounts. Of course, what happened there was, anyway, somehow, remarkably, Sycowski ends up once again at the Polish border, but the Poles gave him the bum's rush. They said, "This is insane." So he went to Paris. He snuck in via the Swiss border. He would do that again years later, where the police reported he had set up an opium morphine trade ring. They were going to close him, but he fled with 37 suits and 40 pairs of shoes to Austria. And he ends up, before he could be arrested on orders from the French for running this opium thing, the Austrians did lock him up because he entered the country on a fake passport. And while he's there, he spreads this story once again that in the U.S. he was called Kid Tiger. And he was a big-time bootlegger in Chicago with distilleries all over Canada. Why? I mean, everyone else had their distilleries mostly just in Cook County, but I guess he was special. And he had his in Canada. And he and Al Capone were just tight. They were incredibly close. Him and Jack Legs Diamond. By the way, Jack Legs Diamond was, people think he was a bootlegger. He was mostly a dope dealer. Went back and forth to Europe cutting dope deals. Anyway, him and Diamond were just pals. And, of course, Diamond gets killed. Capone goes to jail. I think he was in Alcatraz at this point, or Atlanta, and that Sycowski is guarding again, as we all know, several $million, and he was. But he said he had deposited the money. He had smart enough to get it out of the American banks and put it in a bank in Amsterdam. Just to add a little topping on the story, he says, by the way, Bugsy Siegel is my half brother. So another rumor that he started was that he had financial connections to Mussolini's fascist party, and that he was personally had so much money he was underwriting the dictator's war in Ethiopia and Africa. They had invaded there. How he did that is amazing. He hired some Italian guy to come to the jail and speak to him in Italian. And nobody there spoke Italian. Well, Sycowski didn't speak Italian either, but what does it matter? He just went, see. And the guy leaves, so he says, you know who that was? That was Mussolini's guy. They want more money. They're constantly taking advantage. I just don't know what. Anyway, so for a man, by the way, who had no income, he did have money. The border guards found a lot of expensive jewelry buried in pockets in his suitcase, and about $16,000 worth of Swiss francs, again, buried in his luggage. The little that is actually known about Sycowski is he was born in Wieloglen, Poland, on July 13th, 1892, the son of a Jewish feldspar. I don't know what that is. I'll have to look it up. The family moved to Chicago legally. He said that he jumped on a boat as a boy and ended up in America. They came legally in 1898. I checked. And he did have arrests in New York and Chicago and L.A. Booze related. He was a small-time smuggler, booze smuggler. All that was very interesting, but the Austrians, they locked him up for 7 months. They kept him for 7 months. Then they booted him out of the country and put him on the Romanian border for some reason. The Romanians said no, they don't want him in. They didn't let him in. He managed to sneak into France again, guess what, through Switzerland, lived in Paris for a while, and then they deported him to Gdansk. I think that's how it's pronounced, Poland. This time, he told the Polish authorities, you guys need to start treating me better because I am actually Prince Alexei Romanov, the same Alexei Romanov, the little boy who was murdered by the Bolsheviks in 1918. I don't know how that went. But anyway, at that point, the war is on and he disappears. And newspapers reported that he was Jewish, probably picked up by the Nazis and murdered. But in 1953, the London Telegraph reports that Sycowski was arrested at the French border trying to, yes, you guessed, sneak into France by, yes, Switzerland. They identified him from his fingerprints. This time he was nice enough to bring a passport with him. It was an Argentine passport in the name of his pal, Fernandez Navarro. Remember him? This time he says he's from Vigo, Spain, and that he makes his living as an international gambler. You have to have a job to get into these countries. You can't say I don't have a job. And he says he's an international gambler. Not only that, he says he's a really close pal of Egypt's recently deposed king, Farouk, who was then in exile in Paris. And Sycowski says, I'm on my way to the king's house now. So I guess the guards, for lack of anything else to do, said, well, why? And he said, well, because I spent 1952 in Cannes, which he did. So a fact is, while he was in Cannes, he lost $82,000 in pounds sterling gambling at the tables. But he says he's going to see Farouk because Farouk still owed him around 15,000 pounds from a $40,000 baccarat game, and he was just going to collect the money. You know how these royals are. The reason they spotted him, by the way, this guy, he's traveling over the border in a chauffeur-driven American car. Even today, cars in Europe are generally small, but trust me, in the 40s, whatever, they were really small. And this guy's driving a big-ass American gas guzzler across the Alps. So the French didn't arrest him because basically they didn't want him there. They just, let's get rid of this guy. So they turned him over to the Swiss, and they said, no. The Swiss wouldn't even take him. The French sent out a dozen requests for any nation to extradite this guy. No one took up on the offer. I don't know what happened to Sycowski. I did check Ancestry and a lot of other places. I think whatever happened to him, he probably landed on his feet.
Xylophone is spelled with an X. That's wrong. Xylophone, Z, X. I don't see it. It should be a Z up front, you know? Next time you have to spell xylophone, use a Z. And if someone says, hey, that's wrong, say, no, it ain't. If you think that's wrong, you need to have your head Z-rayed. Yeah, it's like... Yeah. It's like X wasn't given enough to do, so they had to promise it more. Okay, you won't start a lot of words, but we will give you a co-starring role in Tic-Tac-Toe. And you will be equated with hugs and kisses. And you will mark the spot. And incidentally, you will start xylophone. Are you happy, you damn X?
Everybody falls in love somehow. Something in your kiss just told me that sometime is now. Everybody finds somebody someplace. There's no telling where love may appear. Something in your heart keeps saying that someplace is here. If I had it in my power, I'd arrange for every girl to have your charm. Then every minute, every hour, every boy would find what I found in your arms. Everybody loves somebody sometime. And although my dream was overdue, your love made it well worth waiting for someone like you. If I had it in my power, I would arrange for every girl to have your charm.